So last week I was in Darwin, which is at the very top of Australia, and I was sent there to facilitate a training course to some employees. And the training course that I was facilitating is called Crucial Conversations, which is based on the book by the same name. It's a very high quality course and I highly recommend it. Every participant receives a participant toolkit, a copy of the book, and an audio companion. And if you're looking for a training course to help your employees have hard and difficult conversations in a productive way that leads to results, I highly recommend that you check out Crucial Conversations. After facilitating for 2 days, maybe think about putting together a video with some tips and tricks on how to facilitate training courses based on my experience as a facilitator and HR professional. The tips and tricks that I'll be providing, they won't be directly related to Crucial Conversation. They will be based on different ideas and concepts that I've practiced throughout my career as a facilitator. So before I get into the content, I wanted to explain my terrible moustache, which is for a good cause. This year I am raising funds for Movember. I'm currently at $809. But I'd really like to get to 1,000. So if you do feel like making a donation, my link is included in the description. Movember raises a lot of money for men's mental health, and they fund different programs for men in the community. And they also do lots of research, so it's for a great cause. If you would like to make a donation, doesn't matter how small it is, I would really appreciate it. So the first tip that I wanted to talk about in terms of facilitation and facilitating a training course in particular is to know the content. And the first tip that I would like to offer in terms of that is to read the book that the course is based on. So a lot of training courses are based on books that authors have written, and Crucial Conversations is no different. As you'll see, the participants, they receive a copy of the Crucial Conversations book. And it's not essential to read the book for the training course that you are facilitating, but it does offer you some legitimacy and some reference material to refer to. The second tip that I offer in terms of knowing the content is to practice what you're going to say prior to facilitating the course itself. What I like to do is I'll schedule a day to work from home, I'll set up my laptop, I'll get my facilitator guide, and I will actually practice what I'm going to say for each slide, and I'll get my clicker out and I'll work through all of the content just to make sure that I really understand it. And sometimes I'll practice in front of my kids, and I remember one time my daughter Claire was like, "Papa, stop, this is so boring." And in hindsight, facilitating Crucial Conversations to a 4-year-old, probably not ideal, but it is a good way to make sure that you're bringing your true and best facilitator self to your practice if you're practicing in front of other people. So that's the second tip that I would offer, is to practice the content prior to the training session itself. So the next area that I wanted to talk about is building rapport. And this is going to be, I guess, unique to you as a facilitator. Everyone has a different way of facilitating. I will share with you some tips and tricks that I use in order to build rapport, but it will really come down to you and how you like to facilitate. I have a particular style that I like to use, and over time, as you facilitate more and more, you will develop confidence to facilitate, and your style might change over time. But I think it's important that you think about how you want to build rapport. And I have an opening statement that I use every time when I'm facilitating. So I'll generally say something like, "Thank you for having me here. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to facilitate this training course to you. I learn something every time that I teach this course based on the contributions and opinions and insights that you offer. So if at any stage you have a different view in terms of what I'm explaining, or you have a different way of seeing things, I'd really like you to interrupt me and just say, 'Hey Dave, I have a different way of seeing this,' and share your opinion, share your insights, because that helps me to learn, and it also helps other people to learn. So we're all kind of learning together. And you might think that, oh, I'm not sure whether I should offer this, I'm not sure whether it's going to add value, but I'd really encourage you to kind of step into that space and offer your contributions, because you never know whether the question that you have or the insight that you're offering will help someone else. So that's generally the statement that I use every time that I open a training course, and I find it's a really great way to build rapport and kind of set the scene for how I'm going to facilitate. So I generally have a pretty relaxed kind of informal style. It's still a high quality learning experience, but I let participants know that they can interrupt me and we can have a discussion about different things and we can have a bit of a debate. The other way that I like to build rapport is I like to build in humor where I can. And humor can be a bit of a dangerous one. You need to be very careful in terms of the jokes that you're making. I can't remember who it was, but I was listening to a podcast recently. I think it may have been Tim Ferriss, Jerry Seinfeld, and I think it was Seinfeld who was talking about how the process that he uses to write his jokes. And it's very methodical, very formulaic. He writes things down, he tests them, he refines them. And that's the approach that I take to jokes that I use during training courses. I use similar jokes, I'll test them, I'll refine them, I'll write them down, and I'll make sure that they are safe to use. And in terms of the humor that I use, I think it's important to err on the side of self-deprecating humor. As a facilitator, it's not a good idea if you make a joke about someone in the room. That can quickly go bad. And so I recommend that you work on self-deprecating humor. So an example of that I use quite often is in one of the training courses that I facilitate, there's an exercise where we go through how we were able to get our way as children. So what did you do as a child to get your way? And in different groups, different table groups, I will go around and I'll ask people, and often people say, oh, you know, I used to chuck tantrums, or I'd cry, or that type of thing. My parents were quite strict. I grew up in the country. You know, we did what we were told, those kinds of things. And often I will share a little bit about my background and my childhood, and I'll contribute to the discussion. And I'll say to them, look, you know, growing up, both my parents were immigrants, as you might be able to tell from my eyebrows, and we used to do X, Y, Z. And that joke about my eyebrows, it never fails to get a bit of a laugh from people, and it kind of sets the scene in terms of, you know, we can have a joke, we can have a laugh, and we can kind of all learn together. So that's an example of how I build humor into the facilitation process. I could also make a joke about my moustache. Just another quick plug for Movember. Again, my link is in the description. If you would like to make a donation, I would really appreciate it. So the next area that I wanted to talk to you about is logistics. And I'm filming this from a fantastic training room. You can't really see a lot of detail from this shot, but this is a really good room to facilitate in. But you won't always have a room that is this high quality. And in some cases, you won't know what the room looks like until you show up on the day of your training. And that leads me to my first tip, which is to arrive early. It's a really simple tip, it's really practical, but it can make a big difference for your training. So I like to arrive at least an hour before the training is due to start, which gives me ample time to make sure that things have been set up the way that I asked them to be set up, or if they aren't, it gives me time to fix them. Often I am flying around the country and going to different operational sites and locations, and in some cases hotels, and so I won't know what the training room looks like until I show up. So arriving at least an hour early gives me a lot of time to make sure that I can change the room setup or troubleshoot any IT issues, or make sure that things are set up in a way that provides an optimal experience for training participants. So the next tip that I wanted to offer in terms of logistics is to carry your own IT equipment. I'm not talking about a projector or anything silly like that. I'm really just talking about basic connectors and converters, so that when you show up with your laptop, you can troubleshoot any issues that you might encounter. Often when I show up at a training venue, it will be set up the way that I've requested, but in some cases I'll try to connect and the connection won't work, or it won't be set up in a way that's compatible with my laptop. And that's why I recommend that you carry different connectors and cables that you can use to troubleshoot any issues. I like to travel with the GoRuck dock kit. I really like GoRuck as a brand. I use their backpack for my commute to work, which I've also covered in a separate video. And as you can see in here, there's just a bunch of different cables and connectors, so HDMI, VGA, USB-C stuff, all those types of things, so that if I encounter any issues, I can quickly troubleshoot them and I'm not wasting any time, and I can set up in a way that is optimal for the training participants. So that's the second tip I would offer, is to travel with some basic IT equipment so that you can troubleshoot any connection issues. So the next tip that I wanted to offer in terms of logistics, it's a really basic one, but it can make a big difference for participants and their learning experience, is the way that the room is set up. At the moment, you can see this room is set up in a U style, which isn't really optimal for a training experience. I prefer for things to be set up banquet style, which is basically where you would get 2 or 3 desks and put them together to make a bigger table. And then you would put participants around that table so that they can all have group discussions. So if you had a group of 18 you would probably put them in maybe 3 groups of 6, or depending on how the training course works, you might have 6 groups of 3. And the reason that you set things up banquet style is because a lot of the time when you're facilitating a training course, there are group exercises. So you will say to participants, okay team, what we're going to do now is do a bit of a table group exercise. So please turn to page 57 of the participant guide, follow the instructions there, and then have a group discussion, and then we'll come back together as a bigger class and debrief on what you have learned. And that's why I would recommend that you have things set up in banquet style. So the next tip that I wanted to offer in terms of logistics is to manage the time. And when it comes to facilitating a training course, it's really important that you as the facilitator keep things moving and that you don't have to rush. I worked for a great leader in the past who used to say, don't rush and don't be rushed. And that's stayed with me for a long time. And I think it's a really useful concept that you can use when you are facilitating a training course. And often when you're facilitating in your office building, during breaks, participants have the opportunity to go back to their desks and do some work. And in a lot of cases, it can be tricky to get them to come back at the allocated time. And what I've come up with is a concept that I call time champions. It's a little bit geeky, but people seem to get into it, and it seems to make a big difference in terms of managing time. And so what I will do is when it's time for a break, I'll say to participants, does anyone have the time? And invariably someone will say, yeah, it is 2:30. And I'll say, okay, thanks Sally for telling me the time. And also thank you for volunteering to be this round's time champion. And what I'll do is I'll write Sally's name on the board, and I will say, all right, Sally, it's 2:30. We're gonna take 15 minutes for a break, which means we're gonna come back at 2:45. And what I'd like you to do, Sally, is to be a bit of a time champion for us and to role model returning on time. And if you see any stragglers, to encourage them to come back on time as well. And I put everyone's name on the board so you can see that Jack, he got 100% when he was the time champion, and then you can put everyone's names on there. And in terms of 100%, what that really represents is if you have 10 participants and everyone comes back by the allocated time, you get 100%. It's a bit geeky, but some people seem to get into it. And the other thing that I do in order to help people be across and manage their time is I put on the screen, on the projector, I just use a really simple timer and I show how long the break is. So in this case, if it was 2:30 and we were going to take 15 minutes for an afternoon tea break, I'd put 15 minutes on the clock on the screen so that participants can see how much time they have left. And then by the time the timer goes off, if everyone's back in the room, then it is 100% for Sally, and you can write that on the board. Sally feels good, everyone has a bit of a laugh. It is really lame, but I found it makes a big difference. The next area that I wanted to talk about is managing the crowd. And I didn't have a better way to kind of explain this, but it's really the dynamic that exists in terms of the participants and how you are facilitating. So managing the crowd, it is your job as a facilitator to make sure that energy is high and that people are learning and you're adapting your style based on what is going in the room. And the first tip that I would like to offer is how to deal with hecklers. And when it comes to hecklers, I'm not really meaning like in a comedy club kind of situation where you've got someone who is arguing and debating and you know, giving you a really hard time. In terms of hecklers in a training course kind of facilitation environment, what I mean is a participant or an employee who doesn't want to be there. And there might be a few different reasons why they don't want to be there. They might have received some feedback from a leader who said, you know, I see you as having a deficiency in this area and I recommend that you attend this training course to address that. And the way that that leader may have delivered that message may have led to the employee not wanting to do the training. Or another example might be, it might be as a result of a disciplinary sanction and employees received a written warning and they've been told that they need to do a training course. So they're kind of being sent to the training course against their will. And as a facilitator, that's a really hard place for you to be in. And this hasn't happened to me, but I've spoken to other facilitators who've said that in some cases, they've had someone in their training course who's been challenging them so often and in a negative, disrespectful way, they've had to have a conversation with them during one of the breaks. So they've had to pull them aside and say, hey, look, during the last session, you said this particular comment and I found it a little bit disrespectful and it's making it a bit hard for me to do my role as a facilitator. So I wanted to see what your thoughts are on that. In a lot of cases, once you have that conversation, you have the discussion, the employee might open up and say, look, I don't really want to be here. Or they might say, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just going through a bit of a hard time. I'll make sure that going forwards, I'll contribute in a more productive and healthy kind of way. In some cases, they might say, look, I don't want to be here. And then facilitators that I've spoken to, they've given them the option to leave the training course. So they've said, well, okay, if you don't want to be here, that's up to you. You can leave the training course and maybe do it at another time. I'd love to have you here. So if you do want to continue, I'd be happy to have you continue the course, but I wanted to give you that option. And having that conversation can be it can be a bit awkward, can be a bit confronting, but it's a great way to make sure that you're managing anyone in the room who doesn't really want to be there. The next tip that I wanted to offer in terms of managing the crowd is how to foster discussion. So often you will be having a discussion with employees in the room and you'll be asking them different questions. And in a lot of cases, people will give short answers or they'll give one-word answers. And you want to get participants to engage. You want them to contribute. So there's another training course I facilitate. I think it's Unconscious Bias by Franklin Covey. And in that course, there's some discussion around what does courage mean? And so you'll ask the participants, hey, what does courage mean to you? And lots of people will say bravery, strength, doing the right thing, those types of things. And when people give those one-word answers, in order to kind of engage with the room and to foster some discussion, I'll ask them questions like, well, can you tell us a bit more about that? Or I'll say, can you give us an example of how that plays out in your personal life or your professional life? Or I'll say, can you unpack that for us? And you'll notice a lot of these questions, they are a bit closed in nature. So I'm giving the employee or the participant the opportunity to say, oh, no, I don't want to go into more detail. Because I found that a lot of these courses, they can be quite confronting, quite emotional for participants. So I always want to give the opportunity for people to say, oh no, I'd rather not go into detail. It's a bit personal for me. If that happens, that's 100% okay. I just say, okay, thank you for letting me know. Perhaps later, if you'd like to share, we can give you an opportunity to go into some more detail. So that's how I foster discussion. The next tip I'll offer in terms of managing the crowd is how to deal with questions from the room. So often you will be asked a question from the room where they'll say, well, Dave, how does this work? Or what are your thoughts on this? Or they'll ask for detail around the slide that you're presenting or a concept that you've just worked on. And in a lot of cases, as a facilitator, you are going to know the answer. But I think it's a really powerful way to maintain the energy and to get things, to keep people engaged, is if you say something like, well, I have a view on this, but I'm interested to hear, does anyone in the room have an opinion? And that gets people talking and having discussions. And it's also a really useful way if you don't know the answer or you need a bit of time to think about it, to buy yourself some time. So you say to people, well, I have a view on this, but I'd be interested to hear what people say. And that's another way to manage the crowd and to keep energy high. The next tip that I wanted to offer in terms of managing the crowd is small group work versus big group work. So a lot of the times you'll be facilitating a course to 18 or 25 employees, and there'll be different exercises that participants need to work through. And in a lot of cases, there will be table group exercise. There will be group discussions. And in some cases, depending on how the energy in the room is going or the size of the group, I will switch up the content delivery. So instead of it being a group discussion, I'll say, all right, let's do this as a big group. We won't do it as a group exercise. Let's all have a discussion about it. And in other times, I will do it in small groups. And what I try to do when I'm putting people into small groups is I try to ask people to stand up and find someone that they haven't worked with. Every time I'm doing a group exercise, I'm continually pushing them to find someone that they haven't worked with. And there's a few reasons I do that. One is because it enables networking within the company. And I read an article recently about how employees who have more connections in a workplace are generally more productive because they have more people that they can rely upon and more people that they can draw upon in terms of different ways of thinking. So every time I'm doing a group exercise, I'm asking people to move around and find someone they haven't worked with. And getting people to stand up as well, that's another way to make sure that you're managing the energy and keeping everyone engaged. So that's the final tip that I wanted to offer in terms of managing the crowd. I really hope you've enjoyed this video and it's given you some ideas that you can use when you are facilitating a training course, or if you're facilitating a training course for the first time, I really hope that it's given you some confidence in terms of doing that. If you are an experienced facilitator and you have some tips and tricks that I haven't covered that you'd feel confident in sharing, please let us know in the comments section below. Facilitation of training courses, that often sits under the umbrella of organizational development or learning and development within organizations. And I have another video where I go through organizational development in detail. So if you are interested in OD, I recommend that you check that one out. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and I hope that you have a powerful day.